Good morning, everyone. So in today's session, we'll discuss about IGCSE Chapter 16, that is reproduction. This topic is again slightly long as compared to the other topics. And those who are writing exams in 2024 and 2025, this is important discussion going to be. And students and teachers who are preparing for exams, who are helping student to prepare for the board exam, they can also watch this video, and this will guide teachers how to deliver the topic. So without wasting time, let's begin with the topic. And in this discussion, we'll talk about reproduction. This topic is quite long, so there are subsections in this topic. I will take you through all the sections. So first is we'll discuss about the types of the reproduction. First is asexual reproduction, limited to the definition. Then identifying examples where these type of reproduction takes place. Of course, if this process is going on, there will be some advantage and some disadvantage we are going to discuss in terms of population and in terms of crop production. After this, we'll talk about sexual reproduction, where we'll discuss about the process. Then we'll discuss about fertilization. Then we'll discuss about the gametes, why they are haploid and how the zygote becomes diploid. Then we'll discuss about advantage and disadvantage of this kind of reproductive process. After this, we have sexual reproduction in plants, right? This topic is again comes under the same topic, where we will see the structure of the insect pollinated flower related to sepals, petals, stamen, filaments, anther, carpels, style, stigma, ovary, and ovules. Then we'll see the function also, function of these parts. Identify in diagram and images and describe the anther and stigma of a wind pollinated flower. Then then we will distinguish between pollen grains of insect and the wind pollinated flower. Then we'll discuss about what is pollination. Then we'll discuss about what is self-pollination, what is cross-pollination, and we'll also discuss the potential effect of self-pollination and cross-pollination in the population in terms of variation, in terms of the capacity to respond to the change in the surrounding, in the conditions, and reliance on pollinators. Then we'll discuss about the fertilization process, how it takes place. Then we'll discuss about the structural adaptation of insect and the wind pollinated flower. Then there is an investigation where we will see the um, conditions required for seed to germinate. And here we will limit our investigation based on water, oxygen, and stable temperature. Describe the growth of pollen tube and how the fertilization takes place. Then sexual reproduction in human, we'll discuss about the male reproductive part. Then we have a female reproductive part, right? Then we'll discuss about what is fertilization and the fusion of the male and the female gamete. Then we'll talk about adaptive features of the sperm cells and the egg cells, how they are able to perform their function, what are the structural changes they have. Then we'll do the comparison between the male and the female gametes, state that in early development zygote forms an embryo, and we'll see the embryonic development in a diagram, describe the function of placenta, then state that some pathogens and toxins can pass across the placenta and it's going to affect the fetus. Then we'll discuss about sexual hormones in humans. We'll talk about testosterone hormone, estrogen hormone, and how they control the secondary sexual character. Then we'll discuss about the menstrual cycle in female. Then after that, we'll discuss about how estrogen and progesterone uh, works in menstrual cycle and during pregnancy. And at the end, we'll discuss about explain the role of hormones and how they control the menstrual cycle, pregnancy, and it is limited to follicle stimulating hormone FSH, luteinizing hormone LH, progesterone hormone, and estrogen hormone. Then we'll talk about sexually transmitted disease, and in this topic we'll discuss about what is sexual transmitted disease and how the sexual contact caused this. Then we'll talk about HIV virus. Then we'll talk about HIV infection may leads to AIDS and in what condition, we'll discuss that. Method for transmission and how the spread of STD can be controlled. So this is a quite long topic. So we'll go through the topic immediately and we'll make you prepare for the board exam. So let's begin. Okay, so this is the presentation I have made. So I'm just going to share it with you all. So let's continue with the topic. So I have divided the entire topic in 5 parts, where one by one I will discuss about first asexual reproduction, then sexual reproduction, then sexual reproduction in plants and humans. Then we will talk about hormones and birth control and STDs. Okay. So let's begin. So what is reproduction? In one line, as per the Cambridge definitions given in the syllabus guideline, it says a process that makes more of the same kind of organism, right? So in one line, they ask 2 mark questions. So you can add about that it occurs in the organism, the same species where the same kind of organisms are produced, right? You can also say in terms of asexual method and sexual method, right? So let's go to the next. So definition is very important. Now there is a 2 type of reproduction. So first we are going to talk about asexual reproduction. So asexual reproduction does not involve sex cells. Always remember, in asexual reproduction, we need just one organism. And one organism is sufficient to produce the new organism. There is no need of sex chromosomes or sex cells or fertilization in this process. So only one parent is required. So there is no fusion of gametes. There is no mixing of genetic informations, right? Because a single parent is sufficient to produce the new organism. And the organism which is going to produce, they are genetically similar. They are 100% identical to the parent cells. That is why we define asexual reproduction as a process resulting in genetically identical offspring from one parent. Right? So of course, we need some examples here. Who undergoes asexual reproduction? So generally bacteria, right? So bacteria produces the exact number of genetic information, exact number of the copy, and they are going to divide by asexual reproduction. And the process called binary fission. There are some plants which also grow by and divide by asexual method, like using bulbs and tubers. Right. So actually bulbs and tubers are the storage molecules, storage organ in the plant, right? So they are, again here also, plant will be genetically identical to old or parent cell. So in bacteria, we call them binary fission. In plants, we say vegetative propagation. So we'll talk about vegetative propagation after some time. So let's go to the next slide. This diagram shows how the bacterial cell divided by asexual method. So this is the bacterial cell wall. Inside there is a genetic material, and this is the cell membrane, the second yellow line. So first the nuclear region is going to break like this into half, and then once genetic material get half, then cell get divided into like this. and we get two daughter cells. So actually bacteria produce exactly the same genetic copies of themselves in a type of asexual reproduction, right? So both the genetic information is 100% same, and both these daughter cells look like same because the same genetic material is going on and the same genetic information is traveling to the next cell. So that is why they are exactly 100% identical to each of them, as well as the parent cell. But when it comes to plant, right, plant have a way to do asexual reproduction. Like this is the bulb formation in onions, right? So plant can reproduce by asexual. So this is a bulb example of bulb, and these are the tubers, right? So tubers are actually smaller. They are swollen and fleshy part which are present inside the soil, and they may develop a plant like this. So some plant develop underground food storage organ that will develop into a next year plant. So that means later on, the tuber will help to generate a new plant like this. And they can take different form, such as bulbs or tubers. So it's not restricted to any form. So we need just one example here. So you can write on tubers and bulbs. There are some plants which grow like this. So the one stem is going to touch the ground. The stem will starts producing a new plant. We call them runner because they are running, right? They're not confined to one place, so they are moving. A best example is strawberry plant. So these grow roots and develop into a separate plant later on. And in this case also, they are 100% identical to the parent plants. Now, when it comes to advantage, there are various advantage like population can be increased rapidly when conditions are appropriate, right, for the condition for the cells to divide, right? Second thing, can exploit stable environment um, very fast because again, if the same kind of plants are growing in one region for a longer period of time, you will find that they have indirectly they are controlling the environmental factor. Maybe some of the organisms are not getting food, or maybe organisms are getting one type of food, right? So so insects they can, I mean, not insect, the animal can migrate. So actually they exploit environmental conditions sometime. More time and energy efficient, of course, that's a big advantage, right? Then reproduction is completely much faster than sexual mode. Of course, just there is no gamete formation, there is no sexual intercourse, right? There is no fertilization, there is no embryo formation. So all this process takes time, right? But in this case, in asexual method, it's it's very quick, very immediate, right? Disadvantage, of course, the disadvantage is there. So disadvantage is that limited genetic variations because offsprings are genetically identical. So they are not suitable for for the climate or anything which is changing in the surrounding because they are not they don't have variations, right? Population is vulnerable to change in the conditions and may be suited for one habitat. That's again a big point because they can't grow anywhere else because they are adapted to that climate. And if there is a disease in one of the variation, one of the plant, it's going to affect all the other population of the plants because of course there is no genetic variation. So organisms are not going to fight against the disease. So there is a chance of getting question from here where you have to write advantage and disadvantage of the asexual mode. Let's talk about sexual method, right? Specifically in crop plant, asexual reproduction can be advantageous as it means that a plant that has good characteristics like high yield variety or the disease resistant quality, can be made to reproduce asexually, and the entire crop will show the same character. And that's very good, right? So this is one example. Second type of reproduction is sexual reproduction, where the gametes are being fused, and these gametes are produced by the male and the female. So the male gametes called sperm cells. Female gamete is called egg cells. And when these two gamete cells are fertilized, a zygote is formed, right? So zygote are diploid, and diploid means they have a complete number of chromosomes. Like take an example of human cells. Human cells have 46 chromosomes. So 46 chromosome is the total number. So a cell having 46 chromosomes is always diploid. Haploid number is half chromosome number, like gamete cells have half chromosome number, right? So we define sexual reproduction as a process which involves the fusion of the male and the female gametes and the production of offspring that are genetically different from each other. They are not similar to any of the parent, right? So when we say fertilization, the meaning is the fusion of the male and the female gametes, right? And due to this, the genetic variation comes in the generation. Where this process takes place, it takes place in all mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians. Some plants also go sexual reproduction, right? And the zygote, which is present here, you can see here, the gray, blue color chromosome is coming from mother side, and the red color chromosome is coming from father side. You can see the sperm cells, so they are present together. So zygote contain 50% information from mother and 50% information from father. Of course, when we talk about sexual reproduction, we'll talk about gametes and zygote, right? So a gamete is a sex cell. Example, sperm cells, ovum cells, pollen grain, right? Gametes differ from normal cells because gamete have a half chromosome number, haploid set, right? Because now the reason why they have half, because when the gamete is going to fuse with another gamete, right? So the half set will be there. So half is here, half is there. So both will combine to make a full set. So in human being, a normal body cells contain 46 chromosomes, but the gamete contain 23 chromosomes. When the male and the female gametes fuse, it becomes the complete number. So 23 plus 23, that makes 46 chromosome. And the first cell having 46 chromosome is the zygote, right? Because they contain full chromosome number. So as I said, haploid means half number of chromosomes in the normal cells, normal body cells. Example, zygote. Sorry, zygote is a diploid cell. Example, egg cell, right? So egg cells, gamete cells, pollen grains, sperm cells all have half chromosome number, but in case of diploid, they have a full set or complete set of chromosome. Now, when asexual reproduction method is going on, so might be there will be some benefit and some disadvantages, right? So let's talk about what is advantage. So advantage is, of course, genetic variation. That's a plus point, and that is why we are able to adjust in the different conditions. So the species can adapt to new environmental stress due to variation, giving them survival advantage. So they can grow faster, they can survive faster, they can adapt in any given conditions. Disease is less likely to affect because of the variation, right? And disadvantage is time consuming. That's a very big disadvantage because sexual reproduction is not a 1 day or 2 day process. It takes many days, right? Many days in sense of producing the egg cells, and then after that, the fusion, fertilization. So it takes time as well as energy. Energy in finding mates, right? That's again very important thing. Difficult for isolated members of the offspring to reproduce. So the most crop plant reproduce sexually, and this is an advantage as it means variation is increased and the genetic variant may be produced which is better able to cope with the weather changes or produce significant high yield crop. And the disadvantage is that variation may lead to offspring that are less successful than the parent cells at growing well or producing a good harvest. So there is possibility. Yield may matter. If we see the sexual reproduction in plants, so we have to understand the sexual organ in plants. Flower is the sexual organ in plants. So let's talk about the basic parts of the flower. See, this is bisexual flower. Why I'm saying bisexual? Because the male stamen and the female carpel, also called pistil, both are present on this particular flower. So we call them bisexual flower. In this case, we can see in the middle, there is a stigma on the top where pollens are going to land. This is the style, and style is going to connect stigma to the ovary. Ovary is this one. This is called female part called carpel. This is the male part. Male part consists of anther and filament. Anther, which contains pollen grains, and filaments, which connects the flower at the base, and we call them stamen. Stamen is the male part. Apart from this, there are petals, which is brighter in color other than green color, and the sepals, which are green in color. Right? So always remember the male part is anther and filament, right? Called stamen. Female part consists of stigma, style, and ovary, which is present in the center. Always. Now let's see the function, what these parts do. So sepal, you can see sepal is you can keep a flower diagram with you and you can check. So sepal is the green part, you can see here in this diagram. So sepal is the green part. So they protects the flower, right, from falling. Petals, there you can see the big color thing other than green color, right? So they are petals. Petals are generally bright in color, and it's very important for insect pollinated flower because the bees, the insects are going to get attracted by the petals, right? Anther, anther produce and release the male sex cells called pollen grains. Stigma is the female part where the pollen grains are going to land, and then pollen grain will grow inside. Ovary produce the female sex organ, and ovule contains the female sex cell, right? So inside ovary, there is ovule. Now, when we talk about pollination, and the most important thing is what type of pollination the flower will do. So on the basis of pollination, we divide the flower into two types, or pollination into two types. Either insect pollinated means insect is going to help, or wind pollinated, or wind is going to help in the pollination. So let's see the diagram of the figure 1. These figures have pollens that are transported by the insects, and you can see these have a pointed edges, right? They have a surface is pointed. Surface is not smooth, surface is rough, so that they can stick to the body surface of insect, right? So they are insect pollinated. Here also spike outer layer hooks. On the insect that pollen can be transported, right? And this is a pollen that is transported by the wind, so generally lighter, smoother surface, right? Let's talk about what is self-pollination and cross-pollination. So self-pollination means when the pollen grain from anther of the flower to the stigma of the same flower. It's like just a one flower having both male and the female part. So male part, the anther is going to fall on the stigma of the female, stigma of the flower. right, on the same plant. They are called examples where this process takes place. Tomato, rice, peas, potatoes, all these examples for self-pollination. This big advantage here. So the plant do not need to rely on pollinator. Wow, that's very important because if they rely on pollinators, then pollinator must come near to them so that they can start the process. Then, of course, it will prevent extension. They are not going to they are not going to lost, right? They will be on earth, and of course it's the faster and easiest way, right? So they don't have to search for the pollen. Big disadvantage: self-pollination reduces the variation, and just now we have seen the importance of the variation in plants. Reduces the ability of the population to respond to the change in the climate or any situation. So in the beginning we were talking about how genetic variation is important in terms of survival. So if there any stress is coming up, the organism is not going to cope up because they don't have variations, right? Variations bring more suitability, more adaptability. When we say cross pollination, the idea is transfer of pollen grain from anther of the anther of the one flower to the stigma of the another flower. It's not on the same flower, right? Examples generally strawberries, right? Daffodils, apple, grapes, they go for self-pollination. Advantage of the self-pollination, variation, very big point, very important point, improves the ability of the population to respond to the climate. And the only disadvantage is it rely on pollinators such as wind, insects, or other animals. If these animals are not there, insects are not there, pollination is not going to be. So let's try to understand how insect pollinated flowers are adapted or formed. So insect pollinated. So we have to remember three things. If it is an insect pollinated flower, so we need insects first. So now the question is how the insect will come. So that's why they have a petals. The petals are the large and the brighter colored part on the flower, and the whole purpose is to attract the bees. Next way how you can attract the bees, scent and the nectar. So scent will attract the birds, attract the bees so that they can visit the flower and they can push inside to get the nectar. So nectar are the sweet sugary substance which is extracted from the flower, right? Then if it is an insect pollinated, then the number of the pollen grains will be slightly less as compared to the wind pollinated, right? And these pollen grains have a spikes on them so that they can bind. Then of course anther. Anther is generally present inside the flower because the insect is going to sit on it. So why they will hang out, right? So they are present inside. Stigma, again, stigma is also present inside and stick to the pollen grains. When an insect pushes the body within the flower. In case of wind pollinated, it's reverse. Wind pollinated, we don't need any insects, right? And no, we don't want colorful petals. So petals are generally dull, or generally petals are not there. Scent, of course, they don't have to call insect. So scent and the nectar both are absent. Yes, the number of pollen grains will be higher because they are going to float in air, right? So more number of pollen grains are being used up. Anther always present outside so that the pollen grains can fall on it and reproduction can take place. Stigma is the outside flower and the feathery to catch the pollen grain from the air. So this is a very basic difference between insect and the wind pollinated in terms of some features. First is petal. So of course they have large, colorful, scented petals. And this in wind pollinated there is no scent. Nectar, yes, nectars will be there. In wind pollinated, nectars are absent. Stamen, actually it's stamen, T is not here. Inside flower, this is long outside the flower. Stigma, it's very small, sticky inside flower, right? So insect is going to rub their body on it, and in this way pollens will fall. In the wind pollinated, stigma are large, feathery, hanging outside the flower so that they can catch the pollen. Pollen, in case of insect pollinated, they are very small and green rounds and sticky or covered with spikes so that they can bind to the body surface. Whereas in case of wind pollinated, pollens are highly large in number, they are light and surface is smooth so that they can easily blown away along with the wind. Okay, so this question I will keep it for you. You can solve it. Fertilization. Now this is very important task because the gametes are produced, right? So fertilization occurs when a pollen nuclear fuses with the ovum nuclei. So the pollen nuclei means the pollen grains fuse with the female gamete, that is egg. Then fertilization takes place. So as the pollen has no tail, right? So they are not going to swing to the ovary of the plant in order to reach female nucleus, right? So they germinate inside and they make a pollen tube. This only happens if the pollen grains has landed on the right kind of stigma. If the pollens are by mistakenly fall on some other plant, so they are not going to help anymore. So the nucleus inside the pollen grain slip down the tube as it grow down the style towards the ovary, and then slowly it will go and fuse with the pollen nucleus. So once the nucleus has been joined together, right? So the ovary has been, that means ovary is fertilized and the zygotes are formed, right? So once zygote is formed, now the zygote will divide by mitotic division, and this division will take place within the ovule. So as different plants have different number of ovules, right? So this explains why different fruit have different number of seeds, because it's going to develop within the ovule, right? So inside it may vary. Factor affecting germination of seeds. So there is a three factor which actually controls the process of germination: water, oxygen, and the temperature. Temperature should be optimum so that enzyme can work. Oxygen help in the respiration to produce energy, and this energy will be used up for germination. Of course, water will provide the medium for the reaction. So as CO2 is not necessary for the germination, but also does not inhibit it. It makes no difference whether it is there or not, right? So it doesn't make sense. If you have to investigate like whether what condition is required for the seed germination, so you can see there are four tubes, all are set with some press seeds and they have a dry oil, and in B you have press seeds and moist, right? Here it's moist, but it is covered with cold water and the layer of the oil. So the layer of oil is creating a blanket between the normal layer and the seed. And type D is the press seeds and most cotyledons. So now let's talk about the conditions. So A, B, and C incubated at 20 degree and then it's kept in fridge. After that, we are going to see the results after some time. Dispersal of seeds and germination. This we have done. Sexual reproduction in human. Now we'll talk about the human reproductive system. So in human, this is the male reproductive part. This is the front part and this is the side part. So Cambridge can ask in any way, right? So always remember from the top this is from the front. This is the penis, which is a muscular organ, right? So penis, and this is the common duct called ejaculatory duct. And here is the junction where the urethra meets, right? So the gametes are coming from here and goes to the ejaculatory duct and where it merges in the same pathway, right? So this white color thing is called testis, and the blood vessel which comes out, the tube which called sperm duct. This is the gland called prostate gland, right? So and this is testis where the gametes are present. Prostate glands, those, so they generally produce liquid called semen, right? That provide sperm cells with the nutrition. Sperm duct is a tube that is mixed with the fluid produced by the gland before being passed into the urethra for ejaculation. So in male, there is just one common path through which the sperms as well as the urine is going to pass. Urethra is the tube running down the center of the penis that can carry out the urethra or semen. Right, a ring of muscles in the urethra prevents the urine and semen from the mixing. So this is very important because there is just one duct through which urine and the gametes are being released. So there are some muscles which prevents the mixing of urine and the semen. Testis, it's a bag of skin called scrotum where these gametes producing cells are present. Right, so bag of skin where the testes are hanging, that's called scrotum, and scrotum generally outside of the body to provide conditions for the gametes to grow and mature. Penis passing urine out of the body from the bladder and also allows semen to pass into the vagina of the woman during sexual intercourse, during physical. So the male insert their penis in the female vagina deep inside so that the gametes are released into the body and goes up to the fallopian tube to get fertilized. So in the female part, we'll see where is fertilization takes place and what is fallopian tube. Okay, so this is female part. So female have a pair of ovaries, then a pair of oviduct, then there is a uterus, then there is a cervix. This is vagina, right? So this is the front view, this is the side view. Oviduct, also called fallopian tube, this is the site where fertilization takes place. Very important site. Ovary produce the gametes as well as the egg cell. Uterus, it's a muscular bag where the fertilized zygote is going to get implant and a new baby is going to form after 9 months. Cervix is a ring of muscles at the lower end of the uterus to keep developing fetus in place. During pregnancy, they should not move, right? So we need some support. Vagina, a muscular tube that leads to the inside of the woman's body, where the male penis will be entered during sexual intercourse and sperms are deposited. Okay, let's go to the next. Of course, the gametes are going to produce, so there will be a fusion of the nuclei, the male and the female gamete. That's process called fertilization. Where this takes place, it takes place in the oviduct, also called fallopian tube. And gametes have adapted to increase the chance of fertilization. You know how? So let's talk about the sperm cells. They have a flagellum so that they can move. They have a tail actually. Cytoplasm containing a store of energy. In sperm cells, they contain enzymes in the head of the region, that's acrosome, which dissolves the jelly coat, right? And jelly coat in the egg cell changes after fertilization. This is the structure of the egg cell and the sperm cells. Sperm cells have three parts: the head part, the middle part, and this is the tail part. And the acrosome, with the enzymes are present on the top of the cell. Then we have a haploid nucleus. Then there's a mitochondria to provide energy to the cells so that they can swim. Egg cells looks very big as compared to the sperm cells. They have many mitochondria to provide energy. There's the cell membrane and the cytoplasm inside. And of course, the nucleus will be haploid. How these cells are adapted to perform their functions. So let's talk about that. So in case of sperm cells, they have a flagellum. Why they have a flagellum? So that they can swim to the egg. Contain enzyme in the head region. Why? To digest the jelly coat of the cell membrane of the egg cell. Contains many mitochondria, of course, to provide energy from respiration so that the flagellum can move back and forth for locomotion, right? So we need something which can help. Then we have egg cells. So cytoplasm containing a store of energy, provide energy to the dividing cells. They are jelly-like coating that changes after fertilization, and here they are going to help. Comparison of the male and the female gametes. So in terms of size, sperm cells are very, very small. Structure, they have a head part, they have a flagellum, and they have a tail. Round cells with few structural adaptation covered in jelly coats. Motility, highly motile sperm cells. Gamete cells are not motile. Number, produced every day in big amount, but egg cells are produced once in a month. So this is the process of fertilization, where you can see lots of sperm cells are surrounding the egg cells, and any one will able to fertilize it. Then after that, once it get fertilized, now the chances to carry out the pregnancy. So after fertilization in the oviduct, the zygote travel down the uterus. This takes around 3 days sometime, right? 3 to 4 days. So during this time, the zygote will again divide several times, right? And they will form an embryo. So in the uterus, the embryo will get embedded in the thick lining called implantation, also called endometrium, and continue to grow there. And in human, gestation period is of 9 months. And the major development of organ takes place in the first 12 weeks of the pregnancy, which is also called first trimester. And in the later trimesters, the body is just going to grow, right? And at this point, placenta is formed and embryo is now said to be fetus, right? And the next, whatever uh, monthly process is coming up, or the monthly times are coming up, trimesters are coming up, only the body is going to grow in size, body of the fetus. So in this diagram, you can see the fetus surrounded by a bag-like structure called amniotic sac. Inside this amniotic sac, we have a liquid called amniotic fluid, right? And this amniotic fluid is made up of mother's blood plasma. And this protects the fetus from any physical harm to the mother, like there's a bump to the mother's abdomen. So this will help. Umbilical cords, you can see here, which joins the fetus blood supply to the placenta for efficient exchange of toxins, exchange of nutrients. So during the gestation period, the fetus develop and grow to gain glucose, amino acid, fats, water, oxygen. From where? From the mother's blood. So the blood runs opposite each other, never mixing in placenta. So there is no blood connection between mother and the child. Fetus blood connect to and from the placenta by umbilical cord. The mother's blood also absorbs waste from the fetal blood in the placenta, like urea, carbon dioxide, because these are poisonous substances. Movement of all these molecules across the placenta is by the process of diffusion. And placenta is providing a large surface area for efficient diffusion process. The placenta acts as a barrier, actually, barrier for toxins, some pathogen they should not cross, else they will affect the fetus, such as some virus, like rubella virus, right? So placenta will stop the entry of this rubella virus. This is why pregnant women are advised not to smoke during pregnancy, right? Because they contain nicotine and they can cross the placenta and go to the baby, right? So we must avoid all these. So after the baby has been born, the umbilical cord is cut and it's going to tie up. Of course, it is not going to hurt the baby because it is non-neural connection. So it get easily dried up once baby has expelled out, right? So the placenta detached from the uterus wall shortly after the birth, and then the babies come out safely from the mother's body. This is a symbolic representation of how in each and every stage how they look like, how the zygote look like. Amniotic fluid is the liquid present inside the amniotic sac. They have a three primarily business. First is protecting embryo from physical damage, also supporting the embryo in terms of even pressure all around. They should not develop without any restrictions, right? And of course, amniotic fluid also provide restricted movement of the fetus within the body. So if you can see this diagram, the placenta is very thick. It's around 1 or 2 kg in weight. And you can see this is the mother's blood coming here, and this is the baby's blood, right? So we can say there is no neural connection, there is no attachment, they are just present nearby, right? So let's see what diffuses from mother to fetus. Of course, all glucose, amino acid, fats, minerals, vitamins, water, and oxygen. What goes from mother to fetus? What goes from fetus to mother? Carbon dioxide and urea, right? Primary sexual character and the secondary sexual character. This is very unique topic because we all experience all these changes in our body and the changes which you can find after a certain age. That's called secondary sexual character, right? So we'll talk about how the primary character and the secondary character are different. So just take an example. If suppose a child is born in the hospital, right? So doctors see the genitals of the baby and then they say whether it's a he or she. But after a certain age, the sex organs in the body produce a hormone which brings some change, and that change is unique for male and the female. And on that basis, we can say whether it's a female or male, right? So in case of female, the secondary sexual character involves formation of breasts. You can see the breast size is slightly increased, right? That's the female character, also called mammary gland. Body hairs grow, menstrual cycle begin, which is very important. Hip get wider and round. In case of male, growth in penis and testis, growth of facial and body hair, muscle development, voice breaks, and of course, testis will start producing sperm cells. Menstrual cycle is a very unique cycle which takes place only in female mammals or other organisms, right? So menstrual cycle is starting from puberty at age of 9 to 12 in case of female, and the average menstrual cycle lasts for 28 days, in which ovulation occurs about halfway through the cycle. If the cycle is of 28 days, so egg is going to produce in the middle of the cycle, that is on day 14. And once egg is produced, it is traveled down to the oviduct, also called fallopian tube, where the egg is going to temporarily store. If the egg is not fertilized, right, then it will cause menstruation for the next cycle. And meanwhile, the thicker wall of the blood vessel will get thinner. And it lasts for 5 to 7 days in the beginning of the next cycle. After menstruation finishes, the lining of the uterus start thickening again and again. So we'll talk about the pictures of developing follicles after some time. But here we can see in the diagram that day 14 is the when the egg is going to release, and after that the inner walls are still getting thicker. Ovulation is checked, right? Not ovulation. I mean, the menstrual cycle can be checked. It's a monthly cycle. So from day one, let's start from here. From day one, you can see the endometrium lining is not there. It's getting cleaned. And from day 7 onwards, start building. And if the egg is not fertilized, you can see here, it's going to degenerate. And then everything is flushed along with the blood. That's called menstrual bleeding. In the body, menstrual cycle is controlled by 4 hormones. You can say FSH, LH, estrogen, and progesterone. All 4 hormones have different functions, but yes, all are produced by different parts of the body. Like, take an example, FSH and LH is produced by follicle stimulating hormone called pituitary gland, and this causes egg in the ovary to mature. So if FSH is not there, egg is not going to get mature. What LH do? Help in release of the matured egg. LH is the luteinizing hormone. Estrogen and progesterone, they maintains the lining of the uterus so that the gametes, which is fused, right? So the pregnancy will be carried out. So hormonal control of the menstrual cycle. So let's talk about how it is being controlled. So on the graph, you can see there is a two graph, estrogen graph and the progesterone graph. So estrogen is produced by ovary, right? Where the estrogen level is rise from day 1 to peak just 1 day before mm, ovulation, right? So what they do during this time, they initiate the uterine wall to start getting thicker and egg maturation also. And in the peak of estrogen just occur 1 day before the egg is released. And progesterone stay low during that time from day 1 to day 14. But from day 14 onward, their number is also increasing, right? Because female bodies get prepared for carry out pregnancy if egg is fertilized. If it is not fertilized, then egg cell is going to get degenerate and everything will be flushed away in the first day of menstrual cycle, from first day to fifth day. That was the role of estrogen and progesterone. Let's talk about what FSH and LH is doing. So FSH, as the name FSH, follicle stimulating hormone. These two, LH and FSH, are produced by the pituitary gland, and it causes ovaries to do the process. So what are the process? Let's see. So FSH is it's also stimulate like the FSH ovary to start releasing estrogen, and the pituitary gland is stimulated to release LH2 when estrogen level reach its peak, right? So LH cause ovulation to occur and also stimulate the ovary to produce progesterone hormone. So the green line is the FSH line, which is starting from day 1, and there is a rise in between day 7 and 14, right? Because their function is to stimulate the egg maturation. So now egg is started maturing. So egg must be released. So LH is higher on day 14. So that will cause release of the egg in the middle of the cycle. So let's now try understand all 4 hormones, how they are coordinating. So we'll read the points, right? So as we have discussed separately about all 4 hormones, we will try to combine all 4 hormones simultaneously. The pituitary gland produces FSH, which stimulate the development of follicles in the ovary. An egg develop into An egg develops inside the follicle, and the follicle produces the hormone estrogen. Estrogen causes growth and repair of the lining of the uterus wall and inhibit the production of FSH. When estrogen level is high, it produces uh, enough, right, which stimulates the release of the egg cells, right? So egg cell is going to release on the middle of the cycle, right? Because it is being stimulated by luteinizing hormone, right? So in this way, the egg is released in the middle of the cycle. Now the follicles, which was broken in the middle and they have released the egg cell, the follicle will remain there, and the follicles becomes corpus luteum and starts producing progesterone later on. So progesterone maintains the uterine lining. If the ovum is not fertilized, the corpus luteum will break. Of course, when the egg is not fertilized, then there is no need of progesterone hormone, so they will start breaking down. This causes menstruation, where the uterine lining breaks down and it removes through the vagina, commonly known as period. In pregnancy, if pregnancy does not occurs, the corpus luteum continue to produce progesterone, preventing the uterine lining from breaking down and aborting the pregnancy. It does this until the placenta has developed, at which point it starts secreting progesterone and continue to do so through the pregnancy. HIV. HIV is an infectious disease which is caused by unprotected sexual intercourse, right? It may cause transfer of the virus from bacteria or exchange of the body fluids, right? Using non-sterile syringe from mother to the child during breastfeeding, blood transfusion, organ transplant, and of course, if it is unprotected sex. So majority of the transmission is due to unprotected sex. HIV is not transmitted. There are so many ways we can stay with the HIV people, but it's not going to transfer the infection. First is either you can eat with the person on the same dining table, on the same table, or the insects bite while touching, kissing the person, using their clothes, or using same toilet seats. So HIV is not going to transmit through these ways. Symptoms, very basic and fundamental symptoms: body aches, chills, mouth ulcer, fatigue, short throat, fever, night sweat, swollen lymph node, and skin rashes. How to control? There are so many ways. Promote sex education among teenagers, right? People should know what is that. Protect physical contact. Use of condoms reduce the risk of HIV, and safe injections. Use unused syringe on regular use. How HIV affects the immune system? So see, HIV is a virus which is going to affect your immune system. So virus infect a certain type of lymphocyte in the body, and normally lymphocytes seek out and destroy pathogens. So if these lymphocytes are going to get infected by the virus, then lymphocytes are not going to produce antibodies. If then infects a certain type of lymphocyte, the use of cells machinery to multiply, and in this way, they will reduce the number of lymphocytes of the immune system. And of course, the number of antibodies will also go down. This decrease condition of the body ability to fight against any infection, it is going to drop down, and eventually it will cause AIDS. Thank you. Hope you have understood this topic, and we'll start the new topic. Thank you.